This is a really challenging topic. It seems out the gate very easy, very black and white. Thou shalt not lie, one of the 10 commandments. How could you possibly think that lying could be anything other than a sin? And when it actually becomes a question is under specific situations where potentially somebody's life is at risk, right? If you're living in Nazi Germany and you're hiding a Jew and somebody comes banging on your door asking if you have any Jews, what do you say? If you are participating in the Underground Railroad, hiding, somebody who's escaped from slavery and somebody comes knocking on your door looking for that person, do you say that, oh yeah, they're here, but you can't come in? Or do you lie in order to protect them? These are really challenging situations. And I just wanted to kind of alleviate that challenge, that pressure a little bit by going over what the Bible actually has to say about lying, because it does actually show us examples in some pretty great depth of when it's a good thing to lie in those types of situations and when it's a bad thing to lie. And it starts off in the 10 Commandments, actually. We have here, we see actually that the commandment doesn't say, thou shalt not lie. It says, you must not testify falsely against your neighbor. Now, I agree that testify falsely is pretty much the same thing as lying. Absolutely. I'm going to say, overall, testify falsely, exactly the same thing as lying. The part that changes it is against your neighbor. Now, this is different than testifying like for the sake of your neighbor, testifying falsely, right? So if you're testifying in order to protect somebody from something that's evil, you would be testifying falsely in order to protect your neighbor from evil, right? So that would be a completely different lie than testifying against your neighbor, right? And so we have this, falsely. You can testify against your neighbor as long as it's a true testimony, right? But when we're testifying falsely against our neighbor in such a way that it harms them, that's the bad scenario. Now that you can kind of take it or leave it as an interpretation, but I see this backed up throughout the Bible, especially with these Hebrew midwives. Very interesting scenario. Pharaoh wants to kill all the babies. We have Pharaoh, king of Egypt, gave this order to the Hebrew midwives. He said, when you help the Hebrew women as they give birth, watch as they deliver. If the baby's a boy, kill him. If it's a girl, let her live. But because the midwives feared God, they refused to obey the king's orders. They allowed the boys to live too. So the king of Egypt called for the midwives, and he said, why haven't you done this? Why have you allowed the boys to live? And the Hebrew women, they come to him, and he's asked this question, why have you let them live? And they choose dishonesty in this scenario. They say, the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. They are more vigorous and have their babies so quickly that we cannot get there in time. So it's actually quite an absurd lie if Pharaoh was educated at all on how these things worked. But this is a lie that they tell in order to protect the Hebrew babies and protect the mothers from having their babies taken from them. And this is the really interesting part, because we get a lot of sin happening in the Bible. But God rewards the midwives for doing this. It says, so God was good to the midwives directly after this lie. So God was good to the midwives, and the Israelites continued to multiply, growing more and more powerful. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. Again, in Joshua, we have this situation where the spies have gone into the land. They're in the city of Jericho. It's one of the biggest cities that rivals the Israelites coming into the land and taking over the land of Canaan. They were told to go scout the land on the other side of the river, the Jordan River, especially around Jericho. So the two men set out and came to the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed that night. Why were they staying the night with a prostitute? Very interesting stuff. So the king of Jericho sent orders to Rahab, bring out the men who have come to your house, for they have come here to spy out the whole land. Rahab had hidden the two men, but she replied, yes, the men were here earlier, but I didn't know where they were from. They left the town at dusk, as the gates were about to close. I don't know where they went. If you hurry, you can probably catch up with them. And it shows here that actually she had hidden them up on the roof. She knew where they were. She completely tells a convincing lie to the guards who have come to ask her, where are these guys? She sends these guys on a wild goose chase, outright lying to these guys. And she's saved for this lie. Because of this lie, she's saved. And you could say, oh, that's just the people of Israel were honoring the fact that she lied because it helped him. It's not something necessarily where God honored that. But we actually see in Matthew that we have a record of the ancestors of Jesus. And Rahab enters after this lie, because of this lie actually, enters the ancestry of Jesus. She becomes like a great, some amount of greats, grandmother of Jesus. First David and then Jesus. That's absolutely crazy to be, what is this, great or great grandmother of David, and then later on to be in the ancestry of the Messiah, somebody that isn't even an Israelite. We have this situation where Saul is trying to kill David. As far as God's concerned, David is next in line to be king. Saul doesn't like that, and he's trying to kill him. And Jonathan doesn't believe David. He's like, why would my dad be trying to kill you? That's ridiculous. And so they make this deal that David's going to go hide in a field. If your father asks where I am, tell him I asked permission to go home to Bethlehem for an annual family sacrifice. This is not just an off-the-cuff lie. This wasn't like he got in a situation he didn't know what to do. This was planned out beforehand. Hey, if this happens, lie to your dad. This is like David made this plan. The man after God's own heart. The man that when he does mess up, like with Bathsheba, there are very, very evident consequences for David. But here we have him just saying, hey, let's plan to lie to your dad, right? Let's plan to lie to your dad. And here we have Jonathan enacting the plan. Saul asked Jonathan, why hasn't the son of Jesse been here for the meal either yesterday or today? And Jonathan replied, David earnestly asked me if he could go to Bethlehem. He said, please let me go, for we are having a family sacrifice. My brother demanded that I be there, so please let me get away to see my brothers. That's why he hasn't been here at the king's table. He embellishes the story even more than what's recorded that David asked him to. And so we have this interesting situation here. This is kind of the third pretty major time that we see a lie told in order to protect somebody from someone who is evil, someone who has evil intentions, right? And every single time it's portrayed as a good deed. But the Bible does still stress honesty. Honesty is a value that is well valued in the Bible, even in the Psalms. These are, probably written by David. May integrity and honesty protect me, for I put my hope in you. We see this throughout the Bible. This is not an occasional thing. The value of honesty is consistently stressed throughout the Bible. So are we kind of splitting hairs here as far as how do we know that it's okay to lie when we're protecting somebody from evil and that it's not okay to lie at other times? Is there a gray area in there, and how do we be sure that we know where that is? And I think that Jesus describes that kind of the way that we should interpret that really well. This is Matthew chapter 20. You have Jesus here was asked, what's the most important command in the law of Moses? And Jesus replies, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. That's the first and greatest commandment. The second one is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. And then Jesus says this is really important. The entire law and all the demands of the prophets are based on these two commandments. So if you are looking at a commandment and you're like, I'm not exactly sure how to interpret this, Jesus tells us right here, here's how you interpret it, is there's two commandments that every single other commandment should be interpreted through. And that's the command to love God and love people. And if your interpretation of a command seems unloving towards God or people, that's something you should probably take a look at and see, oh, does this actually make sense if I look at it through this lens of every single law should help me to love God and love people and should be a way that I do that to them. So there's my hot take. Lying is not always a sin. If you're lying in order to protect somebody, and that's part of having integrity and being somebody who's worthy of trust, right? Being an honest person in general helps us to gain trust. But in addition to that, I trust somebody more if I know that they would lie to protect me from an evil person. And I think that that's something that makes complete sense in context of loving yourself and loving others. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I know this is going to be get some wild pushback, so I'm excited to hear everybody's thoughts.